You have a drawer you never open. Inside it is a charger for a phone you no longer own, a single earring whose partner vanished years ago, a key that fits no lock you can remember, a pen that ran dry before you can even recall using it. You keep them anyway. Somewhere in your home, there is a mug with a hairline crack running down one side, and you still reach for it first. There is a wobbling chair you refuse to throw out, a jacket with a zip that died 2 winters ago, a photograph torn clean down the middle, folded, and kept inside a book for years. None of these things work. All of them stay. You might tell yourself you are simply lazy, that you will deal with the drawer one day. But that is not the real reason, and some quiet part of you already knows it. Because this habit is not new. It is not modern clutter, and it is not a personal flaw. It is one of the oldest things your species does. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before writing, long before cities, long before money, your ancestors were doing the exact same thing you do. They were holding on to objects that had stopped being useful, and when archaeologists uncover those objects today, the pattern is so deliberate, so strange, that it forces a question almost no one ever thinks to ask. Why did ancient humans keep broken things? The easy answer is poverty. In a world with no factories, no shops, no next-day delivery, a cracked pot was still a pot. You used what you had until it fell apart, and then you found a use for the pieces. Waste nothing. Survive. It sounds obvious, and in some cases, it is even true. But it does not explain the strangest part. Because again and again, across continents and across thousands of years, we find something the survival story simply cannot account for. The objects were not worn out, they were broken on purpose. Consider the work of the archaeologist Richard Bradley, who spent decades studying what ancient Europeans did with their most precious things: bronze swords, fine axes, ornaments that took enormous skill, time, and rare metal to create. You would expect objects like these to be treasured, guarded, and passed down whole through the generations. Instead, they were destroyed. People took perfectly good swords and bent them, snapped them, folded the metal back on itself so the blade could never cut anything again. Then they carried them to a river, a bog, or a lake, and threw them into the water, into places where no human hand could ever pull them back out. Think about that for a moment. Why destroy the very thing you worked hardest to make? Why break what you could so easily have kept? This was not an accident, and it was not carelessness. It happened too often, in too many places, following patterns far too consistent to be random. For these people, breaking the object was not the failure. Breaking the object was the entire point. And here is where it becomes stranger still, because sometimes they did not throw the pieces away. Sometimes they carefully kept them. The archaeologist John Chapman studied thousands of broken objects from ancient southeastern Europe, and he noticed something that quietly reshaped how we understand this. Pottery, figurines, ornaments, all snapped cleanly in two. But when he went looking for the missing halves, they were often nowhere near their partner. One fragment would be buried inside a house. The matching fragment would surface in a grave, or in an entirely different settlement, sometimes a great distance away. The two halves had been separated on purpose. Chapman gave this idea a name. He called it enchainment. The word simply means linking people together, the way individual links form a chain. And his argument was this: when two people needed to be bound to one another by a marriage, a promise, a debt, a farewell, they would take a single object and break it deliberately in two. Each person kept one half. The broken object was no longer a broken object. It was a bond made solid. As long as you held your fragment, you held the relationship itself. The crack down the middle was not damage. It was proof that somewhere out there, across the hills, another person was holding the other side of you. Do you understand what that means? For these people, a whole object was almost empty. It was just a thing. But a broken one carried something a whole one never could. It carried a person. a moment, a promise that outlived the day it was made. This flips our entire assumption upside down. We tend to believe the broken version of something is worth less than the whole. Cracked, chipped, torn, incomplete. Damaged goods. But to your ancestors, the break was often the most valuable part of all. The break was exactly where the meaning lived. There is another layer beneath this, older even than the chain. In grave after grave, across cultures that never met and never could have shared the idea, archaeologists find objects that were deliberately shattered before being placed with the dead. A bowl with a hole punched clean through its base. A blade snapped in half and laid beside the body. To us, this looks like destruction. To them, many researchers believe it was release. You broke the object so that its essence could travel with the person it belonged to. A living thing was kept whole. A thing meant for the dead had to be broken to follow them. The object was not being thrown away. It was being sent somewhere you could not go. To understand why any of this feels so natural to a human being, it helps to go back to the anthropologist Marcel Mauss and his study of how ancient people gave gifts. Mauss noticed something that still unsettles economists today. In many older societies, a gift was never truly free of the giver. A piece of the person who gave it stayed inside the object forever, like a fingerprint that could not be washed off. To hold the gift was to hold a part of them. Now imagine breaking that gift in half and sharing it. You are not dividing an object. You are dividing a person between two people so that each carries a piece of the other. The anthropologist Annette Weiner spent her career on the deepest version of this idea. She studied objects that people refused to fully give away and refused to throw out, objects she called inalienable possessions. The word inalienable simply means it cannot be separated from you. It is yours in a way that has nothing to do with price. These are the things you would run back into a burning house to save. And Weiner noticed that their power often had nothing to do with whether they still worked or even whether they were whole. A tattered cloth passed down through 5 generations, a worn, useless heirloom that no one would buy. Their value came entirely from what they had absorbed, whose hands had held them, what they had witnessed. The object had become a container for memory. And memory does not care in the slightest whether the mug still holds water. So the broken thing survives. Not despite the break, but because of everything the break has come to hold. Now, come back to your own home for a moment. Come back to that drawer, because everything I have just described, you are still doing. Right now, in a world of endless replacements where a new mug costs almost nothing and a new charger arrives by tomorrow, you still keep the broken one. And when somebody asks you why, you cannot quite put it into words. Modern psychology has a name for one part of this. It is called the endowment effect, and it was demonstrated in a now famous series of experiments by Richard Thaler and Daniel Kahneman. They handed ordinary people a plain coffee mug and then offered to buy it back. The instant the mug became yours, you suddenly wanted far more money to part with it than you would ever have paid to get it in the first place. Simply owning the thing made you value it more. Ownership changes an object. It stops being a thing in the world and quietly becomes a thing that is yours. And there is something gentler still underneath even that. Psychologists who study grief describe what they call continuing bonds. When we lose someone we love, we do not simply let them go. We keep their sweater, their watch, their handwriting on a torn scrap of paper. We keep the object because in some way we cannot fully explain the object keeps them. The cracked mug was your grandmother's. The torn photograph is the only copy left. The wobbling chair once stood in a kitchen that no longer exists. Have you ever noticed that the things you cannot throw away are almost never the useful ones? You are not keeping junk. You are keeping fragments. You are holding your half of a chain whose other half is a person, a place, a version of your own life that broke away from you and drifted somewhere you can no longer follow. Your ancestors buried one half of a pot in a grave so that a bond would never fully end. You slide one half of a torn photograph into a book for exactly the same reason. Tens of thousands of years apart, with no memory of each other, reaching for the identical instinct, the same quiet refusal to let a broken thing be only broken. So the next time you slide open that drawer, the one full of chargers that charge nothing and keys that open nothing, do not be so quick to call it clutter. You are looking at one of the oldest human behaviors there is. The deep, wordless understanding that some things break in a way that does not lessen them, but deepens them. That a fracture can hold more than a flawless surface ever could. That a crack is sometimes the place where a person, or a promise, or an entire lost world has been carefully stored. You have a drawer you never open. But now you know it was never truly about the objects at all. It was about everything they were broken away from. And in keeping them, you are doing precisely what humans have always done. Standing quietly on one side of a crack, holding your half of the chain, waiting for a hole that is never coming back, and refusing, gently, to let go of it anyway.